A king stands in a dim candlelit chamber, breath heavy, face flushed from wine. Behind him, the walls are lined with portraits of the 6 women he swore to love, 2 executed, 1 abandoned, 1 dead in childbirth, 1 discarded, and 1 who survived him barely. This is Henry VIII, the king who tore his kingdom from the church because 1 woman wasn't enough, the king who devoured feasts until his body could no longer carry him, the king whose desire for a single son cost thousands of lives, the king who turned romance into war, marriage into execution, and love into fear. He began as England's golden prince, handsome, athletic, adored. He ended up bloated, paranoid, and surrounded by enemies he created himself. This is the truth behind the passions, the obsessions, and the sins that transformed Henry VIII from the hope of a nation into the king who destroyed everything he touched. Before Henry VIII became the monstrous figure history remembers, he was something entirely different, a prince so gifted, so admired, and so full of promise that Europe genuinely believed a new era was being born. As a young man, Henry was everything a king was supposed to be. He spoke multiple languages. He played music, wrote poetry, danced, hunted, wrestled, and excelled at every sport placed before him. Ambassadors wrote home in disbelief, calling him the handsomest prince in Christendom. He wasn't just talented, he was extraordinary. But the perfection everyone admired had a shadow behind it. Henry was never meant to be king. His older brother Arthur was the heir, calm, steady, everything their father wanted. When Arthur died suddenly at just 15, the crown shifted onto Henry's shoulders overnight. England gained a new prince, but Henry gained something far heavier, the fear of failing where his brother never had the chance to. From that day, he lived with a quiet pressure he never admitted publicly, a belief that he had to prove his worth at all times. He wasn't just replacing a prince. He was replacing an idea, the perfect King England imagined Arthur would have become. And Henry tried to fill that void by being exceptional at everything. The court gave him unlimited access to what he desired: grand feasts, imported wines, lavish tournaments, expensive clothes, and constant praise. He grew up believing that the world existed to satisfy him. If he wanted something, he took it. If he desired admiration, he demanded it. And if he felt insecure, those insecurities turned into entitlement. Even as a teenager, the pattern was clear. Henry didn't like limits, not on his body, not on his ego, and certainly not on his desires. These impulses were small at first, but they would grow, year by year, until they shaped the man he became. Behind the charming smile and athletic grace, the seeds of something darker were already taking root: the need to be adored, the fear of being forgotten, and the quiet certainty that destiny was his to command. He was a golden prince, yes, but one who carried more hunger inside him than he could ever admit. When Henry VIII took the throne at just 17, he also inherited something else, a marriage already arranged for him. Catherine of Aragon, daughter of Ferdinand and Isabella of Spain, widow of his older brother Arthur, had been waiting years for Henry to come of age. Their union wasn't born from passion or desire. It was politics, security, and duty wrapped into one crown. At first, Henry embraced the marriage. Catherine was intelligent, respected, admired across Europe, and genuinely devoted to him. For a young king who wanted to appear strong and honorable, she was the perfect partner. But the problem wasn't Catherine. It was what she couldn't give him. The Tudor dynasty was young, and Henry believed that his legacy, his strength, and even God's judgment on him were tied to one thing: a male heir. Catherine became pregnant many times, but tragedy followed nearly every attempt. Stillbirths, miscarriages, infants who lived only weeks. Only one child survived, a daughter, Mary. Each loss pushed Henry deeper into frustration and fear. Every funeral, every failed pregnancy, every quiet moment where he stared at the cradle meant for a son chipped away at their marriage. Catherine prayed for strength. Henry started looking elsewhere. He took mistresses, just like many kings before him. But for Henry, these affairs weren't just lust. They were escape. Escape from disappointment. Escape from the pressure to secure England's future. Escape from the fear that maybe God really was punishing him. As the years stretched into decades, the marriage that once brought stability now felt like a prison he couldn't escape. Catherine aged. Henry grew restless. He wanted youth, beauty, passion, and above all, a boy who could wear his crown. By his mid-30s, the young prince, filled with hope and promise, had become a king desperately searching for something he believed Catherine could never give him. That desperation began to reshape not just his marriage, but the future of England itself. And then he met the woman who awakened every hunger he'd kept buried. Anne Boleyn did not enter Henry's life quietly. She arrived like a spark, small at first, but capable of burning an entire kingdom to the ground. Unlike the soft-spoken court ladies Henry had grown used to, Anne was different. She was sharp, educated in France, fluent in flirtation and politics, and completely uninterested in being another royal mistress. When Henry noticed her, she didn't bow. She didn't blush. She didn't fall into his arms. She resisted, and that resistance changed everything. For a king used to taking whatever he wanted, Anne's refusal was intoxicating. She didn't just challenge him. She awakened something inside him. Desire mixed with ego, ambition tangled with obsession. Henry wasn't in love, not at first. He was fascinated. Anne played the court game better than anyone, keeping him close enough to chase but far enough to crave. She refused to sleep with him. She refused to be the other woman. Her message was simple. If you want me, make me your queen. Henry's attraction turned into fixation. As the years passed and Catherine of Aragon failed to give him a son, Anne's presence became more tempting and more dangerous. She was everything Catherine wasn't: younger, bolder, and unafraid to speak her mind. Her confidence made Henry feel alive again. Her ambition made him feel powerful. Her refusal made him feel wanted. But Anne wasn't just a romantic temptation. She was a political earthquake. To have her, Henry would need to do the unthinkable: break from the Catholic Church, defy the Pope, and tear England away from centuries of religious tradition. And he did it, not with hesitation, but with absolute conviction. Henry reshaped England's laws, its faith and its future for one woman. And when the break was complete, Anne finally got what she demanded: a crown. But with the crown came pressure, and with pressure came fear. Anne needed to produce a male heir fast. Instead, she gave birth to a daughter, the future Queen Elizabeth I. No son meant no security. No security meant Henry's desire began to turn into frustration, then suspicion, then rage. Anne's brilliance, her ambition, and her fire, the same traits that made Henry chase her, now made her dangerous in his eyes. Her downfall was no longer a distant possibility. It was approaching. Anne Boleyn's rise had changed England. Her fall would shake it even harder. By 1536, the woman Henry had torn a kingdom apart to marry was no longer the woman he wanted. Anne had given him a daughter, but not the son he believed God owed him. Her second pregnancy ended in a miscarriage, and rumors claim it happened after Henry shouted at her in public. From that moment on, their marriage began to unravel. Anne's greatest strength, her boldness, now turned into her greatest danger. She argued with Henry. She challenged him. She pushed when he wanted silence. And in a court filled with ambitious men eager to survive, a queen who spoke too freely was a liability. Meanwhile, another woman had caught Henry's eye. Jane Seymour, quiet, gentle, and everything Anne was not. She didn't challenge him. She soothed him. She didn't excite him. She calmed him. And soon Henry began imagining a future where Anne no longer existed. The turning point came fast. Accusations began to circulate. Adultery, treason, even witchcraft. Were they true? Almost certainly not. But Henry didn't want the truth. He wanted freedom. Anne was arrested and taken to the Tower of London, the same place she had once entered as the future queen. Now she entered as a prisoner. Within days, Henry's court manufactured a case against her. 5 men were accused of being her lovers, including her own brother. All were executed. And then came the moment that would define the rest of Henry's reign. On May 19, 1536, Anne Boleyn walked onto the scaffold, calm and composed, dressed in a dark gown. She addressed the crowd with dignity, refusing to blame Henry. Moments later, a French swordsman ended her life with a single stroke. Henry didn't mourn. He didn't hesitate. He didn't look back. The very next day, he was seen riding joyfully through London. And less than 2 weeks later, he married Jane Seymour. This was the clearest sign of the king he was becoming. A man willing to use execution as a tool. A man who saw betrayal everywhere except within himself. A man growing more impulsive, more paranoid, and more dangerous. Jane Seymour entered Henry's life like a breath of calm after a storm. Where Anne had been fire, Jane was quiet warmth, gentle manners, soft speech, and a willingness to give Henry what he wanted most, peace. And for a brief moment, Henry believed he had finally found it. Jane became pregnant quickly, and in October 1537, she delivered the child Henry had chased through 2 decades of marriage. A healthy baby boy, Prince Edward. For Henry, this was triumph. For Jane, it was fatal. Complications followed the birth, and less than 2 weeks later, she died. Henry's response was unlike anything he showed with any other wife. He mourned her deeply. He dressed in black. He refused to remarry for years. In his memory, Jane became perfect, the ideal wife he lost too soon. But while Henry grieved, his body and mind began to change. A jousting accident years earlier had reawakened an old leg injury. The wound kept reopening, refusing to heal, filling with infection. Exercise became painful. Movement became slow. And for the first time in his life, Henry turned to food and drink, not for celebration, but for comfort. This was where the decline began. Massive feasts became a routine escape. Wine became a nightly companion. His once athletic frame softened and swelled. His temper grew shorter, his patience thinner, his insecurities louder. When the time finally came to remarry, Henry needed a political alliance and fast. His advisors arranged a match with Anne of Cleves, a German princess whose portrait, painted by Hans Holbein, flattered her. When Henry met her in person, he was stunned, and not in a good way. He declared he had been misled. He insulted her appearance. He couldn't hide his disappointment. The marriage lasted 6 months before Henry forced an annulment. Anne, luckily, accepted her fate peacefully and lived out her life comfortably in England. But for Henry, this marriage marked something more serious. It exposed his growing vanity, his increasing insecurity, and the widening gap between the ideal king he once was and the frustrated, aging man he was becoming. His leg worsened. His weight grew. His appetite, both for food and for control, expanded with every passing month. The Golden Prince was gone. In his place stood a king beginning to fall apart, physically, emotionally, and politically. And while Henry wrestled with his marriages and pride, it was ordinary people who paid the price through new taxes, shuttered monasteries, and a kingdom learning to live in the shadow of his decisions. By the time Catherine Howard entered Henry's life, the king was no longer the handsome athlete who dazzled Europe. He was older, heavier, constantly in pain and desperate for something he had lost long ago. The feeling of being desired. Catherine Howard was everything he needed to believe he was still young. She was barely in her late teens, lively, flirtatious, charming, and full of energy. To Henry, she wasn't just a new wife. She was a reminder of the man he once was. The aging king fell hard. He showered her with gifts, jewels, feasts, and affection. He called her his rose without a thorn. Courtiers whispered that Henry seemed reborn, smiling and laughing again, trying to dance despite the pain in his leg. But beneath the surface, the truth was far more dangerous. Catherine had a past, one filled with youthful flirtations, secrets, and relationships. When rumors of these old affairs reached Henry's council, fear surged through the court. A queen's purity wasn't just moral, it was political. Any hint of scandal threatened the legitimacy of the Tudor line. When evidence emerged that Catherine had been meeting another man behind Henry's back, the king's fragile pride shattered completely. The same longing that made him adore her now fueled his rage. He felt humiliated, betrayed, mocked by a girl young enough to be his daughter, and his response was swift and brutal. Catherine was arrested and sent to the Tower of London. Witnesses described her as panicked and pleading, screaming that she was innocent, begging to speak to Henry one last time. He refused. In February 1542, Catherine Howard was executed. She was only about 18 or 19 years old. After her death, something shifted permanently inside Henry. He didn't bounce back. He didn't find comfort. He didn't find excitement in a new flirtation. Instead, his health collapsed. His leg ulcer worsened to the point of constant infection. He could barely walk. His weight ballooned. The king, who once dominated jousting tournaments, now had to be carried everywhere. And with the physical decline came something even worse: the paranoia. Henry trusted fewer people. He saw threats everywhere. And each decision he made carried more fear, more anger, and more desperation. Catherine Howard wasn't just another failed marriage. She was the moment Henry's hopes finally gave way to bitterness. By now, Henry had lost all control of his desires, and his kingdom paid the price. By the 1540s, Henry VIII was no longer the prince who dazzled Europe, nor the confident king who reshaped England. He had become something darker, a man trapped in his own failing body, ruled by pain, fear, and cravings he couldn't control. His leg ulcers had grown so severe that every step felt like fire. Court attendants had to lift him with mechanical devices just to move him. His robes had to be widened repeatedly. And the feasts he once enjoyed now served a different purpose: escape. Henry's appetite became legendary. Massive platters of meat, mountains of bread, sweetened wine, and heavy desserts filled his tables. He ate not out of celebration, but out of habit and desperation. Food dulled the pain, wine softened the paranoia, and the indulgence only fed the decline. Terrified of rebellion and betrayal, Henry began purging anyone he viewed as disloyal. Former allies, trusted friends, even longtime advisors fell under suspicion. Some were imprisoned. Some were executed. Some simply disappeared. The king, who once commanded loyalty through charisma, now demanded it through fear. In the midst of this decay came his final wife, Catherine Parr. Unlike his previous queens, she wasn't sought for beauty or passion. Catherine was chosen because she was wise, calm, and politically cautious, exactly what an unstable king needed to survive. And Catherine Parr did survive, not through obedience but through intelligence. She soothed Henry's temper. She supported his children. She kept peace in a court filled with rivals. And when her enemies tried to convince Henry she was a threat, she outmaneuvered them with careful words and calculated humility. She became the only wife who managed to navigate Henry's moods without losing her head. But even with Catherine's influence, Henry's world was collapsing. His body swelled with infection and disease. His memory faltered. His temper became unpredictable, and the kingdom he had reshaped through violence, desire, and ambition now waited for his death with dread and exhaustion. In January 1547, Henry VIII died, bloated, immobile, and spiritually hollow. A king who had once commanded armies now left behind a shattered family, a divided church, and a nation struggling to heal from his choices. The prince full of promise had become a warning. In the centuries since Henry VIII ruled England, his story has often been told through the crown on his head, the laws he passed, and the wives he left behind. But the truth of his life and his downfall was rooted in something far more human. Henry wasn't destroyed by enemies on the battlefield. He wasn't undone by foreign armies or rival kings. He was destroyed from within. His desires shaped every chapter of his reign. The desire to be adored, the desire to be obeyed, the desire to have a son at any cost, the desire to chase youth long after it had slipped away, the desire to silence fear with food, wine, and power. These weren't the weaknesses of a tyrant. They were the weaknesses of a man who never learned how to confront himself. Catherine of Aragon showed his fear of failure. Anne Boleyn revealed his hunger for excitement. Jane Seymour gave him the son he believed would save him. Anne of Cleves exposed his vanity. Catherine Howard exposed his insecurity. Catherine Parr exposed his dependence. Every woman reflected a truth Henry refused to face: that no crown, no victory, no feast, and no marriage could fill the emptiness he carried. In the end, Henry VIII left behind a transformed kingdom, but a broken legacy, a divided church, a traumatized court, a family scarred by suspicion and loss, and a nation still reckoning with the consequences of his choices. He conquered nobles, lands, and institutions, but he never conquered the one thing that determined his fate: himself.